Step one is to sketch out your composition. So my advice is to simply look at the shape of the hairline and forehead. And then remember, blind contour is important, so follow along the contour. And contour, remember, means edges and delineations. So that means you can see here where her jawline creates a shadow. So what you might refer to as kind of like a double chin, right? So you're drawing that part of it and the bottom side of it. So you can see I have that here. The shadow of the cast shadow under her chin on top of her neck makes that shape. And then this is where her chains are, so I'm just going to leave that place blank for now. So I've got basically the outline of her hair, her neck, the top of her shirt, and then her general structure of her contour of her face. Looking at eyeline, so siding the brows. The brows make an angle like this, so putting that down. The eyes make an angle like this, so going through the pupils or through the corners of the eyes. The nose. So what you can do is sight an angle from the part to the tip of her nose. Makes an angle like that, drop that line down, and then from the tip of her nose to the middle of her chin. Makes an angle like this. So now we have the plane, at least two planes of her face, this being a plane, this being a plane. And then we'll see how she has a plane that goes back in space this direction as well when we start adding value. So right now we have a plane like that, a plane like this, and then eventually we'll see a plane that goes back that direction that wraps around to her ear. 4B is a good place to start. I always like to start dark to light, no matter what medium I'm using. The more that you build those lines on top of one another, of course, the darker the value is going to get. So I always start fairly medium heavy with my pressure when it comes to a dark value, because you can always go darker, but once you go too dark, it might be hard to get back. So especially around her face, like these little marks, you want to just be very light-handed with that for now. And you want to follow the waves or the curves or the curls of the person's hair. And I'm just using a 4B. See how I'm just feathering out, like right here where it goes from black to really dark gray to then dark green and then light green. So I'm going from, I'll go with the 8B. Still making those same kind of flicking wrist movements. Notice how I'm holding the pencil pretty far off of the tip, not bearing down right here. I'm holding it 3/4 of the way down. And then her roots are a little bit darker. but not super dark. So again, I'm kind of making this flicking motion so that it's darker at the roots and then gets lighter as my pressure gets lighter as it moves the direction of the hair as light starts to hit it. So if I were doing charcoal, I would do something similar if I was using a charcoal pencil for the hair. Now what is a little bit less common knowledge when it comes to portraiture is that our hair casts a slight shadow on the rim of our forehead just underneath it. So if you forget that, it looks like you're wearing a cap of hair rather than your hair growing out of your head. There's some areas that are clumping a little bit darker than others. I'm going to add those in. So using my blending stump, I'm going to come down here and blend a little bit of that value that I laid down where I did some wispy hairs so that it looks like there's a little bit of a cast shadow under the hair, like I said. I'm going to blend a little bit of the roots upward. There's a little bit of, if you zoom in, well, it won't let me zoom in, but you can see a tiny little dark triangle right there, so I'm going to add that in. And notice how I'm not bearing down on anything at all. And I had a conversation with some other students recently about students' sensitivity when it comes to drawing. And I don't know if it's because you guys are so used to like the stylus with the iPad or if you're used to pushing keys. I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, a lot of times students tend to be very heavy-handed. And I think you guys need to break yourselves of that when it comes to stuff like this. Just be more sensitive so that you're being a little bit lighter. If you need to test yourself or push yourself, hold your pencil really far away from the tip because that is going to give you a lighter value or a lighter pressure and a more sensitivity to your pressure against the paper. Notice how even though there was that tiny little black triangle, I didn't just make a triangle and color it in. I lightly made a triangle and then colored it in with value, and then I let a lighter value sit up next to it. That way it didn't have just an outline. So a lot of you guys have been dealing with me telling you to stop outlining, and what you're doing is you're making an outline and then you're just going in and basically coloring. And so it's like a coloring book of value, and that's just going to flatten it out. So instead, let that value go all the way up to the edges of that shape that you created, and then bring another value up next to it, so that instead of there being a division line dividing this value from this value, you just have one value next to another value. And then you define an edge, and you can see that right here is what's happening. I'll leave a little rim of a light value right there and then right here. And then we see that tiny little light value, there's a little bit of black that comes out right behind it. So I'm going to add that in. And again, I'm following the way that her hair moves. So like my strokes are following the curve. Do you see how it curves around her head this way and then curves back that way? So that's kind of what I'm doing here, is a very stretched out S-curve, maybe, if that helps you think about it easier. Now, a little piece of advice is that just like with colored pencil, woodless graphite and graphite, it has a shine to it. So colored pencil has a waxy film to it. And you don't want to burnish too quickly, right? You don't want to press down too quickly because then you can't add pigment on top. Same happens with graphite. So like right now, it's pretty shiny, and so it's hard for me to add any more value. But I can go back in if I need it to be really black and fill in those little holes with graphite to make it really black. The other thing you can do is steel wool. So you could steel wool this whole thing, and then it's going to be really soft and fluffy, and it's going to accept the graphite a lot easier, and you won't have these little tiny white holes. And so I will just do that, basically looking at it in puzzles of value. So that, you know, looking for the darkest areas, leaving areas of highlight, and then if I need to, going lightly on top of them to get rid of them or make them so that they're not so obviously a highlight, because that's not really a highlight, but it's lighter in value by contrast. So I'm just going to dull it down just a bit by going over it just a tiny bit. And then see how her hair, these are her bangs, and then these are the pieces of hair that are scooped up into that bun. And so since it's going in that direction, I'm going to try my best to follow that direction. So let's see, where are we at? This is the black. This is that area of kind of yellowy green highlight, so I'm going to leave that there. And just kind of sketch that in so I know that that's that section of bang.